All right, welcome to another session of Authentic Selling Live. Today's guest is Kevin Gaither. He was ran the sales team and has tons of experience over at ZipRecruiter. Tons of experience around the topic that we're going to be covering today. KG, why don't you just give people a little bit of background on yourself and kind of what makes you, super qualified to be talking about this topic today?
You know what, Colin? It's mostly because I've messed this up a lot. Hired thousands of salespeople. I've been at 8 startups. 3 of them have had liquidity events. I've hired a ton of salespeople. When I say ton, I literally mean over 1,000 salespeople. But what the audience is going to get out of today is all the mistakes that I've made that has got me to a very rigid and process-driven interview and hiring process that helps us to improve the probabilities that we're going to make great hires in our startups.
Yeah. And I know, it's going to tie in well with what we do here at Humantic because you're a big, fan of personality and assessments and such. So let's just jump right in here. Today is going to be, me mainly, interviewing Kevin and also having a bit of banter back and forth about, some of the things that you can learn from Kevin's mistakes and the system that he's built in building, rock star sales teams, heavily weighted on using assessments and personality as well. So just KG, like early on, what are some of the mistakes that you made that you think, folks can learn from?
Well, the first thing is just winging it. Not having a process. When you think about interviewing and a recruiting and a hiring process, you have to be process oriented. I know that sounds redundant, but you have to plan it out and you have to make decisions about how long your interview process is going to be and who's going to be, a part of that process. And an early mistake that I made, because no one taught me, Colin, just like everybody else, no one taught me was, you just go in there and ask them some questions and see if you like them or not. And we early on, and this was so bad, Colin, I'm so embarrassed. We would get back into a room at least and decide on the candidate. And we would say, okay, thumbs up. Can they do the job? Do we like them? And do we like them for the team? And that was basically the decision criteria. And the problem with that, of course, is the people that we ended up hiring back then, Colin, were like, good-looking people that looked somewhat like ourselves, and that had nothing to do with whether or not we could hire. And I'm going to touch a chord. There was no diversity in our hiring either, because it was just a bunch of managers that were hiring people that looked like themselves, and that was a mistake. And so I had to go back to the drawing boards from there. I'll let you ask a next question.
Yeah. So, I think the big takeaway there is, right, is not having a process is a losing strategy. Hiring is tough. A bad hire can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, set you back if you're an early stage or even growth company, it could set you back a quarter if you have a series of bad hires, right? So really nailing down a process, I think, is priority one. And then the second thing that I heard you saying there, KG, is, that hiring a bunch of people that are just like yourself is not a winning strategy either. And that kind of ties in nice to personality, right? Because people are going to hire people that they think, oh, hey, we mesh well, so they're a good fit.
Yeah. And it's a huge mistake. And look, if anybody's ever read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders, one of the 7 habits, for God's sakes, I lost my train of thought. It's like, for God's sakes, I can't even think of it. Anyway, we want to sit down and ask ourselves the question, if the job was to speak to me, what would it tell me it needs to be successful? Why is that important, Colin? That's important because we may have good salespeople on our team right now. And another mistake that I made was trying to clone my top performers. Oh, Jane is really great. Let's clone Jane Huge mistake. And why that's a huge mistake is because Jane could be great for your team, but she may not necessarily be an exceptional salesperson, generally speaking. I know that sounds odd, but you want to maintain that objectivity that maybe Jane's not the bee's knees. And so by creating a benchmark that has, let's say, 7 to 12 characteristics on it against which you can evaluate candidates, that's a much better place to start. And part of that personality may come down to their resilience or their coachability, and what's important, Colin, of course, is what does it take at your company, at your startup, to be successful? What personality traits do we need to be looking for? Let me stop. I know you're chomping at the bit to chime in.
Sometimes when I talk with you, KG, you just drop so many value bombs. I'm like, oh, I got a question, another question, another question.
Right. Bring it.
And so thanks for that pause there. Okay. So I want to dig in. I want to dig into one thing here that you mentioned, because
Yeah.
I think our listeners are probably thinking the same thing, which is, why wouldn't you clone your top performer? Why is that? You said that was a bad idea, and you kind of went into it a little bit, right? But let's peel back the onion just a little more and say, what have you seen go wrong when trying to clone? Sounds like you have a little experience there of trying to clone your top performers.
There's an analogy that really resonates with me. And unfortunately, it's a sports analogy, which I know that people don't necessarily like all the time. One of the worst teams in the NFL this year was the Denver Broncos. Now, if you're the Denver Broncos and you look at your series, your running backs or something like that, and you go, all right, we got to do a lot better. Stop, full stop. We got to do much better. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to upgrade our running backs. Who's the best on our team? The best running back on our team is so-and-so. Okay, great. They had 600 yards, which is not good for those that don't follow football. 600 yards and 20 carries a game. Oh, okay, fantastic. Let's go find more people like that. You're neglecting to look out and go, yeah, but what we need to win a Super Bowl is somebody who's doing 1,200 yards a game and 30 carries a game, 3.5 yards per carry, things like that. That's what we're looking for. And you know what? It's really hard, by the way. So, when you look at your top producers, it's actually really hard to clone them. And furthermore, sometimes your top producers are freaking train wrecks. Like they know how to sell, but you're like, I don't want to repeat all the other stuff that goes along with those freaking prima donnas that are like my Eagles, my top. I want to put them in a closet and put a headset on them and just let them go and do their thing. I'll take good things out of them and hire for that, but not clone them necessarily. Because sometimes those top producers, as you know, Colin, they don't necessarily know why they're so good. And so it's hard to replicate that natural talent at times.
I'm glad you said it, but I know exactly what you mean there, right? In one, not everybody's built to be a top producer. So if you're trying to, force a square peg in a round hole, it's just not going to work, right? Number one. And that's why you see, even when there's a lot of things that go wrong when top producers become managers. Hey, you took us here, so this one's on you. But there's a lot that can go wrong because top producers typically think everybody should sell the way that they should. And if they're then responsible for, as a frontline manager or sales leader, they're then trying to get everybody to do the way that they think they should be done. And it just doesn't work. And it causes, it's a train wreck, right? The ruins culture, tons of things could go wrong. Have you seen that before? What's your experience with those types of situations?
You mean the promotion from AE to manager?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I've made that mistake. I've been fooled by that mistake more times than I'd like to admit, actually. And you're 100% correct. It's like Michael Jordan, being a coach. It just didn't work out. Why can't everybody just jump from the free throw line and dunk? It just doesn't happen. And so it's a problem because once again, by the way, now let's talk about hiring for managers. That means that you have not really done a good job of identifying what it takes to be a sales manager at my company or at my startup. Because if you did, you're probably going to have like process oriented, detail oriented,
Mhm.
data driven. And sometimes these top producers, they don't follow the process that you've established for them, and they don't know their numbers other than their commission check. And if you're off by a penny, boy, you better watch out.
Yeah.
And they don't make really good managers. And yes, I have made that mistake. I actually made the mistake twice with the same person,
Oh,
one time. And I thought to myself, I'll never do this again. But I duped myself into thinking this time will be different. It's a learning lesson there. But once again, it goes back to when you're hiring. It's not just for salespeople, but when you're hiring, ask yourself, if the job was to objectively speak to me, what would it tell me it needs to be successful in this job? And then write those things out. And what do those things define as? And come up with 3 behavioral interview questions for each of those characteristics and interview against that benchmark, as opposed to just sort of going, well, that person crushed it, so why don't we just give them a chance?
yeah. I love that example you've now brought up a couple times there, is treating the job as a person, right? And helping remove some of your own bias from the equation, which is hard,
Yeah.
right? So since we're on this topic, just kind of give me, some high level, like, what are some personality traits that you see that make a great individual contributor versus a great sales manager or leader?
Yeah. My clients ask me this all the time. Two clients asked me this yesterday, one for SDRs and one for salespeople, which is very similar. So here's the answer that I gave them. First of all, I'm a huge fan. Everyone says they want to hire driven salespeople, and they nod their head and go, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, I want to
Yeah,
hire
yeah.
driven." But no,
Money motivated.
yeah,
Money
well,
motivated, right?
yeah, we could talk about money motivated. Boy, oh boy, I'm really passionate about that one. But yeah, I want to hire really driven salespeople. Well, what does that mean? And I made so many hiring mistakes, Colin, that I went on a quest and started reading tons and tons of books. One of the books I read was "Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again" by Dr. Chris Croner. How trite of a title, by the way. Never
Yeah,
hire a bad salesperson again. Who's not going to buy that book? And
right.
this was an organizational psychologist that actually defined what drive meant. Drive can be broken out into 3 characteristics: need for achievement, and I'll talk about each one individually in a second. Need for achievement, competitiveness, optimism. For me, I've learned that those are non-negotiables. Need for achievement sets high standards for themselves, works hard in pursuit of their goals. They set goals, and they'll make sacrifices in their personal lives in favor of work success, which isn't necessarily healthy. Okay, but that is a great characteristic. So that's need for achievement. Competitiveness. Many people on this
Mm.
call will probably say things like, well, sure, you got to hire people that are competitive. Let's go hire sales athletes. I want to throw up every time somebody says hire sales athletes. You know why? Because you're neglecting a lot of people that didn't play sports in school or outside of school. And trust me when I tell you, I've hired Division I water polo players at UC Berkeley that couldn't close their way out of a paper bag. So competitiveness. Okay, so they love to win. They view the customer interaction as a competitive situation. They really feed off of the leaderboard. And in fact, when we talk about money motivated, they're striving to be number one, to beat everybody else. The commission check ends up being a result of
Mm.
that, the
Yeah.
after effect of that. That's competitiveness. And then optimism is really easy to understand as a salesperson. Thick skin, you're wired to just blow off the constant rejection that you're facing, and then come back for more. You put on a smile on your face when someone hangs up on you, and you're like, their loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are oddball people. And when you come across somebody who has those 3 characteristics, need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, you really have a driven salesperson. I would go so even further and expand on that, especially at startups, that I need 3 additional characteristics, bar none: resourcefulness. Some people call this grit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Colin, you've built several, 3, 4 successful startups. Okay. When you're faced with problems, you need that like ability to go up, under, around, through problems. That's resourcefulness and grit. And you're not looking around going, hey, who's around to help me? No, you're rolling up your sleeves. You're doing it yourself. Okay. Next, I need coachability, especially at a sales in a sales org. Even if you're really experienced, I still want coachability because you have a lot to learn. So, Colin, tell me about the last time you read a business book in the last 12 months. What was that book? That's continual learning, but coachability. Tell me about the last time you got off a call with your manager and your manager gave you some feedback. What did you do on the very next call? That's coachability. Mm-hmm. And then the third characteristic after that, continual learning. I don't care if you went to college. I really don't. But you have to be a continual learner. You have to be somebody who's constantly feeding your head with knowledge to get better so that you can, improve in your craft. And so I look for all 6 of those things: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. I look for resourcefulness, coachability, and continual learning. And if I was to say those are the only ones I could have, I think I'd be looking for pretty good salespeople that have all those characteristics.
Yeah, I love some of those question examples because I feel like we're operating off of a similar playbook. But I like my variation of the one you mentioned there is about the feedback, right? Looking for coachability. The variation I like to use of that is tell me when you got some feedback from a manager that you didn't agree with and how you handled it, right? So that kind of, and everybody's been in that situation where they've gotten some feedback and they're like, sounds good, but I think I'd rather do it this way. So yeah, I mean, depending on how they handle that. And then, another great question that I like as well is the book, right? Hey, what's the last book? And sometimes people go, oh, I'm reading this, and they give you a lot of detail, and they're actively, and they maybe have it right there on their desk, right? And if you're doing virtual Zoom interviews, as most people are these days, or their eyes kind of go up and they're like, and you're like, you haven't read anything in a while.
Yeah, exactly. Twilight series. Great.
Yeah. So, okay, we talked a lot about, characteristics here and sort of personality traits and things that you look for in good sales hires, right?
Yeah.
I want to kind of circle back, right, to what we talked about in the beginning and just sort of walk through your process, right? Because I know we're both fans of like assessments early on. Mm-hmm. I know that we both, love the idea of that sort of quick call in the beginning. But just walk me through sort of high level, what your process looks like from somebody submitting their resume and getting on your radar, to potentially getting to an offer.
Yeah. Well, okay. If you have not written out your interview process step by step and what the goals are for each of those steps, you're doing yourself a disservice. And if you do that, by the way, you put yourself in like the top 10, 20% of people, because very few people do that. Like very few people do that. Okay. So for me, and Colin, you and I have talked about this before, I don't look at a single resume. Don't do it. Either people don't know how to write resumes and they're crappy, or somebody else wrote the resume for them and they're just overly flowery and they look fantastic. Or it's just full of BS that doesn't, it's not relevant to me, and I'm going to waste my time spending even 10 seconds on it. Right.
The funny thing is some of the best hires that I've made are the ones that had literally the worst resumes. Sometimes you're like, oh, terrible resume, possible good salesperson right there.
Right. Now, how do I cut through that though? It's real simple. When somebody applies, and when I started building the sales team at ZipRecruiter, there were 0 salespeople. And we ultimately built it up to like 550 salespeople, but I had no resources at my disposal. So I had to build all of this myself, and I had to come up with ways to quickly sort through hundreds of resumes. Okay. The easiest thing you do is you come up with a survey. And it was like a 4 or 5 question survey, very objective. Do they, is it this? Is it this? Yes. And there was knockout questions. If they answered, for example, I'm hiring for a hunter sales role. And I give them a choice of, my last job was hunting new accounts, farming existing accounts, no sales experience. The only right answer is hunting accounts. At least for me, it was at that point in time. And I have a series of those. And I don't want to be, go overboard on this, but it's like 4 or 5 questions tops. I even put the compensation in there. The base salary for this role is $45,000. Is that acceptable to you or not? Yes, no. And if it's no, well, why bother? I'm not negotiating it at that point. So those that have all the right answers, step number 2, congratulations. We'd like to move you to the next step of the we is me. We'd like to move you to the next step of the process. Put 15 minutes on my calendar. Boom. Yeah. First step, 15 minutes. And I know you love this one, Colin. Yeah. I flipped the script a little bit on this. They get an FAQs document before the 15-minute call. That's basically every possible question you can, that typically comes up in an interview. They get that before this 15-minute call. Then when we get on the call, I say, great. So I'd love for this to be an opportunity for you to interview me. I know I've sent you the FAQs. Spend the next 15 minutes asking me questions about this opportunity to see if it's a good fit for us or not. And that'll tell me whether or not they read the FAQs document. And if they haven't, they're going to ask a question that's on that document. Boom, they're out. Do they, sound like they just woke up in the morning, Colin? Hello.
Are they fumbling for the document?
Right. Yeah. Are they prepared? Great salespeople ask great questions. So somebody who goes beyond. So once I spend that 15 minutes with them, then it's on to a 45-minute hiring manager phone screen, which at the time that would have been me again. And I'm going through a series of additional objective check questions. Your last sales job, how many transactions a month were you doing? The one before that, how many transactions a month were you doing? And go down the line. If they pass through that with flying colors, that's when I apply the assessment. I love talking about assessments. Why? Everyone's talking about AI these days. Okay. What's AI? AI is a tool to help us make better decisions and do things better. I think about assessments in the exact same way. It's just an additional tool. Here's a mistake, Colin, that I know you've seen. We've talked about this before that people make. They use the assessment as a sole decision-making tool. Yeah. Take the assessment, and if we're going to hire them, either they apply it too late in the interview process with too much weight, or they apply it too early in the interview process with too much weight, and don't go, hey, look, it's another data point. It's not the be all and end all. Let me stop. You want to expand on?
Yeah, and just I want to, anybody who's joining us on the session here, if there's any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll bring them up on the screen and answer those as they come in. So yeah, go ahead. Feel free to answer any questions if we have any pending questions. So Roger, what are the 3 things that are a must-have in a resume to grab the attention of a hiring manager?
You want to jump on that now?
Go ahead. Go for it.
Again, no one gets taught how to write a resume. Okay. So let me start by telling you what you better not have on your resume. You better not have it loaded full of a bunch of words of your responsibilities. I want you to tell me what you accomplished, not what your job description was. Okay. So the 3 things you must have in a resume to grab the attention of the hiring managers: dollars, numbers, percentages. You could make it a series of bullets. Mm-hmm. President's Club, #1 salesperson, increased revenues 50% year over year, ranked #3 out of 550 salespeople, whatever that might be. Those are the 3 things. And this is an opportunity to give some job seekers some help here. You're in the job right now. Let's say you got laid off tomorrow. Is your brag book ready to go with all the things you've accomplished? You better write these things down now, man. I don't know. What do you think? What are the 3 things that are must have in a resume?
I think that, I think that that's a great one, is having those things ready to go and being prepared, right? Because I can't tell you how often people reach out and, we're actively hiring at the moment. And then, you ask for the resume and the common response is, oh, let me polish that up before I send it over. And it's like, have that thing polished and ready to go. If it's not, you're not that serious.
Yeah, totally.
And the interesting thing is I also personally, if say I'm looking for a specific, hunter type role, I'm very aware of how they pursue the job, right? Because just submitting your resume these days is not enough, right? And so if I get one of the benefits of and really investing in a brand as a sales leader, on LinkedIn is hiring's not that hard. You'll find a lot of people that really do want to work with you. If you're consistent and you're showing up and you're adding value on a consistent basis,
That's right.
as a founder that sells, as a sales leader, it's one of the major perks of that. And so if you are hiring, there's a lot of people that'll raise their hand, and they might come in through a DM or a connection request or so on. And simple responses, send your resume. And from there, if you don't follow up and it's for a hunter role,
Yeah.
don't expect to get moved to the next round, right? Because as Kevin and I both agree, I don't even look at the resume. Not yet. I don't look at it yet. I'm
Right.
not going to look at it until after, two additional steps. Then I might look at it. And then we go into deep dive and try to read behind, most people start the resume on the first call, and then they're just like rehashing what's on there and maybe trying to read behind, but between the lines. When you get to the point or the stage in this hiring process where you're actually looking at the resume, you're trying to read between the lines there, because salespeople are, great interviewers. That's what they do with customers every day.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. There's a phrase that my wife is sick of hearing, and that is, when during the interview process, both parties are acting on their best behavior. Think about that, Colin.
Yeah.
During the interview process, both parties, the interviewer and the candidate, they're acting on their best behavior. So if you're a job seeker and you demonstrate behaviors that show me that you're not really good at following up, and you're not really good at asking questions, and you got typos loaded full of your follow-up when you did have it followed up, or there was an assignment you should have done in homework as one of the steps, and you were late. You're acting on your absolute best behavior.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to start giving you $80,000 base salary. You think you're going to get more motivated and better? No, absolutely. Acting on their best behavior.
I don't know your take on this, but I typically assign a writing assignment as part of my process. And I give a 48-hour turnaround. If you turn it around like into the line 48 hours right before, okay, you did what did what was asked. But if you turn that thing around in an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours, same day turnaround, that stands out, right? That's what you're really looking for there.
And the quality is there. See, here's the deal. I don't do writing assessments per se, writing samples there, but I'm not a hater on it. And here's why. Colin, if you're writing out your benchmark of the characteristics that are important, written communication skills is off the charts important to you. So as a result, you would include that when you're doing behavioral interview questions, like, tell me about the last time you wrote really well. Doesn't fly. I want to see that work. I want to see how you actually produce work, because written communication is important. And for God's sakes, with remote selling these days, we're not pounding the pavement anymore. We're not walking into buildings, and so that written communication over text and email and chat and LinkedIn messages, dude, that's critical.
Yeah. It's an important piece, especially I think even more so in today's selling environment. And then, I think another thing is you and I both handle that first call a little bit differently, where you sort of flip the script. But I think a big one, and this is a big one, and some people think it's a little bit harsh, but are they respectful of time, right? So if you do they go overtime? So in my version, I spend, first 10, 15 minutes asking them a lot of questions, and then save 5 minutes for them to ask questions. And if they go over that 5 minutes, that's a big red flag.
Yes. And I'll appreciate if we get to, let's say, 1 minute left.
Yes.
And the candidate says, I know we're coming up on time. I have some
Yes.
additional questions. Do you have time? I have time. That's
Yes.
like live fire.
Yes.
That's live fire. Candidates are acting on their absolute best behavior. You think they're going to model that when they're working for you? Of course they are.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that. So I don't disagree with that. We can go over time as long as they're aware of time, manage the time that they have well,
Yes.
show that they were prepared for that, right? And then approach it in the way that you mentioned there.
Yeah.
It shows, that they have the characteristic of being respectful of time, managing time well, which is something that's extremely important because if they go over and just keep going and rant and ramble or whatever, how do you think sales calls are going to be conducted?
Yeah. Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. You can wrap that into, let's say, developing initial relationships, for example. That's a characteristic that I used to have on one of my benchmarks, and you can assess that, like, and how they build trust. Are they the kind of person that's like, how's the weather out there? Did you see the Cubbies?
Mhm.
Like, is that how they think they're going to build trust? Are they building trust by setting an agenda, checking for time, staying on time, being succinct and concise in their answers? Here's a tactical piece of guidance for those that are doing the interviewing on this call, by the way. Think of your job interviewing a candidate as a coach, by the way. If you find that they're going off track and being extremely long-winded, and you've got 4 additional questions to ask, timeout, Ms. Candidate, Mr. Candidate. I've got 5, 6 other questions I want to ask you. We're kind of getting, this is getting a little bit verbose here. Do me
Yeah.
a favor. Tighten that up a little bit, be a little bit more concise, and especially with the answers, moving forward. Be a coach, help them through the interview process. They'll totally appreciate it, and you'll get more out of that. It's super tactical, but sometimes interviewers will just get pissed. and,
Yeah.
and it doesn't help either party out, blood pressure
Yeah.
or candidate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's better to say something than not say something, right?
Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
because once that happens and you don't speak up, then you're just like, yeah, there's just you've basically checked out, and
Yeah.
that's not the way a good leader should act, right?
No.
And I think often sales leaders might, the job market has definitely shifted quite a bit, but 6 months ago, it was a very different situation, where, it was a little bit more competitive to get good talent, right? And, job seekers were equally interviewing sales leaders and organizations. Now the tables have turned a little bit, right? There's a lot more good talent available due to layoffs and such, which have been
Mhm.
happening quite a bit.
Mhm.
But I think something that really stands out in an interview, and remember, we're talking about hiring salespeople based on personality traits and characteristics that are going to, indicate that they would excel in that role. And I think that it's equally important to see that the candidate was prepared and has some really good questions. So, not a good question, right, is first question out of their mouth about comp, right? Right.
Yeah.
I'm okay with talking about money, right? But if that's like the number one most important thing, bit of a red flag, right? So, but what would be some good questions you would say candidates can bring to the interview process that would show you that they have some of those personality traits and characteristics that you're looking for?
So I counsel job seekers on this all the time. And as a matter of fact, I'm in the throes of putting a digital course together for job seekers. One of the biggest mistakes that job seekers make is not setting up a mission statement for themselves. This isn't a resume, okay? This is like writing down what's important to you about the job that you want, the ideal job that you want. Is it remote? Is it in SaaS? Is it enterprise selling? Is it PLG type of whatever is important to you? Benefits, base salary, stock options. You have to write all these things out and put it into a paragraph, like literally. So what happens, Colin, is you say, I'm looking for a job. You say back, well, what are you looking for? And most job seekers are like, anybody that's looking to hire for salespeople. That's lame. No one's going to help you out. So right out, and I'm getting to the answer to your question, by the way, because once you've taken the time to be thoughtful about what your mission is and what's important to the job, like to you to take this job, the ideal job, even though there's a a glut of employers now relative to there's a lot of candidate supply. You still want to be selective. So the best questions come from that mission statement that tells the interviewer that you're thoughtful about the job that you're looking to take. I don't mind the tell me about the day. Tell me about your day. Tell me about the typical day. That's your FAQ, by the way. Tell me about your typical day. I don't mind that per se, but I do if benefits are important. I'll give you one: work-life balance. So important these days. Everyone's talking about it, right? If you don't bother asking a question about work-life balance, and that's one of the things that's important to you, then you're really wasting time. And it's a thoughtful question. Tell me about the last time that your boss, Mr. Interviewer, Ms. Interviewer, tell me about the last time that your boss did something that demonstrated that they respect a healthy work-life balance in your business. Dude, that is like, who asks questions like that?
Yeah.
Only the most thoughtful of salespeople will ask a question.
Only the most thoughtful, curious, confident, a lot of those traits you're looking for. So
Right.
I like this. I like this here. I want to go back to this one here that Jason brought up, right? Because I think this is a really important one. And I've seen this go wrong for a lot of job seekers,
Yeah.
where, they're promised rainbows and pots of gold.
Yeah.
Typically early stage startup, right?
Yeah.
And company hasn't quite gotten to product market fit. And so how can a candidate sort of, make sure that a company is gotten to that place of product market fit where if they were to get the role, they can be successful with the plan that's laid out?
Yeah. I actually, I really want to hear what you have to say about this, by the way, but
Yeah.
I would start with, there's two questions there. I want to triangulate their answer. In fact, if I can interview multiple people, multiple hiring managers, if I'm a candidate and I'm meeting with multiple people, I'm going to ask several different questions to each one of them and triangulate their answer. One of those questions is, tell me what are the indicators that led you to believe or lead you to believe that you have reached product market, fit. I'm telling you, if it's like 300 customers and they're friends and family, and half of them are paid and the other half are not paid, like they haven't gotten there, just yet. We got 300 customers. Tell me about the breakdown of those customers, where those customers, come from. Oh, it's referrals from the founder. Oops.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a red flag. Okay. But then I would attack it the other way. There must be a distribution in performance on your sales team that exists currently. When I say distribution, there needs to be some, there's a segment of salespeople that are at or above quota, 50, 60% at or above quota, maybe even 70% in some situations. And there has to be some that are below quota. 40, 50% below quota. You want to see what we learned in school is that bell curve. We want to see that bell curve of performance. If they're honest with you, and I would ask for show me the dashboard, do a screen share with me, show me the
or reach out to some people that work there.
Absolutely. Behind the scenes, go find some AEs on there. RepView, I've heard, is a good tool to be using, by the way, in that instance there, to see some of that stuff there. But if you find that 70, 80% of your salespeople are not hitting quota, they're not hitting 100% to quota, that's a big red flag, obviously. I'll go the other way, Colin.
Yeah.
If somebody says every single one of my salespeople is hitting quota, I'd actually really doubt that. I'd really doubt that. And I would dive deeper into that because I've been burned by that one before. I don't know. What would you say to figure out what?
I mean, so it also highly depends on the candidate. I think the thing that's important here is that there's a level of transparency from whoever's hiring or sales leader and candidates where, like, if you haven't quite gotten to product market fit, don't pretend like you have, because that's where I've seen things happen a lot. And, there's some people who are okay with that. It's just, I think it's important to know what you're signing up for. Right. So, Me personally, I love a challenge. If things are too easy, it's not that fun for me, right? So like, even if
Mhm.
something is not fully, product market fit or whatever, like I would be okay with that. I perform extremely well with like challenges and still trying to like, you know, uh, build the landing gear when the plane's already taken off. Like
Yeah.
I excel in those environments.
Right.
That's not everybody,
No.
right? So
Right.
I think you have to know yourself well and then be able to have a candid, conversation and feel that there's transparency on both ends. And if you, on the other side, if you're a rep that's never been in that type of environment and you've worked for a bigger company and a lot of people, you see this a lot going from big, more corporate to smaller startup growth stage companies.
Hmm.
It's a very different situation than what you're used to. And
Hmm.
so you have to know that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we had a couple other questions
Yeah,
here.
yeah. When you find those, that's great.
Yeah.
It's important to Jason Liu to find a company that has good product market fit. So do yourself a favor and start asking, those tough questions. And remember, you have the opportunity to DQ these people too. You
Yeah.
really should view your questions as DQs, not at DQ questions, not like fluffy, every answer is great. Oh, that sounds fantastic. Can I
Yeah.
get an offer, please? Like, please don't do that to yourself because you'll be looking for a new job in 6 months because you're miserable. What's
Yeah,
that?
and honestly, it's the easiest way to stand out in an interview is to ask those tough questions. Those are the people I want,
Mhm.
that even
Mhm.
think to ask those questions or have the guts to ask them.
That's exactly right because you're acting on your best behavior. You're going to do that. You're going to do that on the floor here. What's the next question,
So, is it okay to ask about work environment?
please? I would want to ask about the work environment like 4 different ways. You
Yeah.
know, tell me about the work environment. The hiring manager is already looking for the right answer. Okay. So now I want to come back to them and go, well, what's important to me? I want to ask myself, like, this is why it goes back to the mission statement, Colin. What's important to me about a work environment? Okay. Snacks in the office. I'll just make that up, by the way. Maybe it's important to go in the office. Okay, so that's number one. And it's important that there's snacks in the office and a ping pong table. I'm making that up for the sake of this exercise. I think
Yeah.
that's BS, but you have to understand what's important to you. Tell me about the work environment. Great. That's a good lay in to, get into the question. Then you do some follow-on questions if work environment is that important to you. Tell me about some of the other, in-office benefits that are afforded to the salespeople on the sales floor. Oh, crave beef jerky. Ding, ding, ding. Now I'm in. That sounds fan. Ping pong table and a foosball table. Count me in. Like, but you have to figure out what's important to you. So yes, if I find it so funny that the person's asking, is it okay to ask about the invite? Ask
Yeah.
about anything and everything that is important to you. You deserve it. You deserve it. And if there's a question that's important to you and you ask the question and the hiring manager beats you down for it, that's none of your business. I can't tell you that. They're acting on their best behavior. You got a jerk on your hands.
Yeah.
It tells you a lot about that the company and that hiring manager if something is important to you and you ask about it and they blow you up for it. What do you think?
Yeah. Or they give you some really well polished surface level answer, you know?
Yeah, work-life balance. Wow, we're all work hard, play hard
Yeah.
around here.
Or,
Oh, for God's
or
sakes.
I'll flip it a little bit here, right?
Yeah.
I'll flip it here, right? So one of the questions I like to ask in that first, 15-minute call, is what are you can talk about what are your strengths, right? Well, what are you not good at? And it's like, well, I'm a workaholic. And it's like, yeah, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not, that you gotta you're looking for, are you just feeding answers you think I want to hear, or are you giving me real answers? And now a lot of these are, a lot of these interviews are done on Zoom, right? I think there used to be a lot more in person. I mean, now people have really embraced the remote work environment because now they can tap into talent all over the world, right?
Love
And
it. Love
so
it.
a lot of these interviews will happen over Zoom. And especially even if you do have people come in the office, that's first 15 minutes. You're typically going to do that on a Zoom anyway, assuming you have a in office or hybrid situation. Uh, and you're sort of relying on, reading this person over the Zoom, which is something as a sales leader or even like a founder that hires, if you're running like a founder led sales situation, um, being able to read people's body language and how they answer questions and tone, and if they have a tell, and all of these things, you got to start to learn how to do that stuff virtually. And that goes both ways, really. That was a example of a candidate, hiring manager, sales leader, asking a candidate a question. But same goes the other way, right? If you ask a question and the person you're talking to, has a tell or looks up to the left, or gives you some answer that they sounds really good, those are all red flags on either end.
I screwed up interviewing and making bad hires so bad that I read 3 books on lie detection. 3 books on lie detection, because I was like, I'm so naive. By the way, tell me one of your weaknesses, KG. I'm naive. A good way of answering that weaknesses question, by the way, is to then go, I'm naive. Let me tell you an example of that. And you give the interviewer a good example. Same with strengths, by the way. It helps lend credibility there. But yeah, that's right. I read 3 books on lie detection. Everybody tells a story, I think, is one of those 3. And that's correct. And while I believe in a very disciplined, process-oriented approach with structured questions that each interviewer is asking, and we're going to score candidates out after every interview, Colin, you must incorporate your gut into that. There's signals. In fact, I learned this from Dr. Chris Croner, author of Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again, because I started seeing stuff that didn't sit right, and yet it checked boxes and it looked so good on paper. And I went, but something's not right. And this is an organizational psychologist that wrote the freaking book. And he said, you have to take that gut into consideration, because there's something you're picking up that you can't articulate. And you have to listen to that and incorporate that as another data point that goes into your decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you are the perfect person for this session today. Love, all of the wisdom here, and all this comes through experience. So if you, take any of these things, from this session today, if you're a candidate looking for a job, or if you're, a sales leader that's hiring folks, KG has done this before, made all the mistakes for you, so you don't have to make them yourself. Any final thoughts as we wrap the session up here, KG? And if anybody has any final questions, please drop them in the chat for us.
I think my final thoughts would be, interviewing is the tip of the spear. You can have a great product. You can have great marketing. You can have great leadership, great benefits, great compensation. But if you put the wrong butts into the seats, you're really not getting as much leverage out of it as you possibly could. So make 2023 the year where you're actually going to take steps to invest in getting better at recruiting and interviewing and hiring. And trust me, your career will go into overdrive, because most people don't do that and they don't get trained on that. So that would be a final thought for you.
Yeah. And if any final questions, please drop them in the chat there, and Aru bring them up on screen for us. But I think, if we just were to look at a couple of takeaways here from the session, to kind of tie a bow on this, right? Have a process, stick to the process, right? Assessments, personality characteristics are a huge component that are going to help you navigate through the hiring process. And that should be if the job was a person, what they would tell you that should be, right? Not your own bias, right? And then, we got a question here. So, I mean, if I had to ask if there is micromanaging, it could seem arrogant. I think the most important thing for me is to not be micromanaged and to have a good, honest communication with my manager. How would you ask that in a less direct way? Okay. So I think the original question was, what's the work environment, right? Which is a good way, it's totally okay to ask that, right? Which we touched on
Mhm.
as a lead in to going a layer or two deeper, right?
Mhm.
But go ahead if you want to take a stab at answering this here, KG.
Yeah. So I think that person asking the question is correct. Like, you're not just going to say, "So, do you micromanage?" Like, the hiring manager, I get it, is going to see it, and so you want
Yeah,
to be asking this. The best questions that interviewers ask are these behavioral interview questions. Tell me about a time when this happened, this happened, this happened. Okay, so if not being micromanaged is important to you, then I would think about scenarios in your past when you have been micromanaged and scenarios when you've been managed well. And then you start reframing these into, tell me about the last time a salesperson, didn't hit their call metrics for the day, or tell me about how you're managing to the metrics. If I was to talk to one of your salespeople, how would they tell me you manage to the metrics, or something like that? You want to get it into this, tell me about a time when. So they're telling you a story, and just like Colin was saying, like that body language, if they start giving you like their philosophies on life and you can tell they're avoiding the question, you might have a red flag on your hands. Yeah. So the
yeah,
behavioral question, tell me about a time when, is great for both the interviewer but also the candidate to help get at the truth, because they're forced to tell you a story about
yeah.
that situation. The stories hold all the truth. The true stories hold all the
Yeah.
truth.
It's hard. It's harder to make those up. Right.
Yeah, exactly
Right.
right.
Love it. All right. KG, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who joined today. Thanks for the great questions. Really appreciate it. Make sure you are on the lookout for we're actually, usually we do these every other week, but we are doing another session, same time next week, with Jake Dunlap from Scaled on the modern sales playbook for 2023. So definitely make sure you look out for that session of Authentic Selling Live. And thanks again, KG, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime. You're good people, Colin. Peace.